couple of minutes late, just as we were frantically getting the system back up and running. So I do apologise for that. But thank you for holding on and joining me today. Today we are going to take a bit of a dive into strategy, so that we get a bit of an understanding of what strategy is, what a strategy planning is, why it's important for your business, and with a bit of luck, we are going to be kind of answering 7 questions is the agenda today. We have got a bit of an agenda to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering. We're going to be showing you a chat that I had earlier this week with Mark Crutchley, who heads up our consultancy team here at TaylorMade Technologies. The consultancy team is one of many departments within the engineering side of the business, but their job is really to spend time with you to understand your business goals and your objectives, and how we can help use technology to really try to align ourselves to your goals. How can we use technology to enhance productivity and streamline process, but more importantly, look at that underlying stuff, the hardware, the technology, your warranties, and all the other bits and pieces that go into the big jigsaw puzzle of IT. So we're going to be having a chat with Mark, which we're going to hopefully you'll enjoy. And then at the end of it, we're going to have a quick summary of what we've discussed in that video. So I'll come back in and have a chat with you all and just sum up the conversation that I was having with Mark the other day. And of course, as always, we've got time for questions. So if you've got any questions as you go through, feel free to use the chat section within the web browser. Fire your questions in there, and I'm happy to stand here at the end and run through some of those bits and pieces. Okay. So with the help of my magic assistant, I'm hoping that any second now you'll be getting a video up and running, and then I will come back and join you in a few moments' time. Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm really lucky to have been able to grab some time from Mr. Crutchley, who heads up our consultancy team. But I won't steal all your thunder, Mark. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. So I'm Mark, part of the consultancy team, and it's our job to effectively help organisations create IT strategy plans.
Fantastic. So, Mark, when we think about strategy, then obviously strategy's got lots of meanings in terms of different parts of the business, but really what we want to focus on is IT strategy. So, what is an IT strategy or an IT strategy plan?
So effectively, I define that as a centralised plan where organisations can take ownership of their IT direction. So it's really important that focuses on where the organisation is today, where they want to go, and how they get there. But I think the makeup of an IT strategy plan is really important at the moment, because the technology landscape is changing quite rapidly. So security is a big trend at the moment. That landscape is changing very quickly. We've got newer technologies out in terms of automation and AI, etc. So it's the plan itself is really marrying up what the business wants to do from an objectives perspective and how we best utilise technology to support that.
Yeah, so it's a bit like a business plan then ultimately. But the key thing about a business plan is that's focused on everything within your business. But really, this is focused in on that IT piece and how you can use technology in the business to improve areas of the business or to streamline operational processes. But a business plan typically gets decided in a boardroom, somewhere with influence from other areas. But my experience tells me that an IT strategy plan can't necessarily just come from the IT manager or the board. So who gets involved in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to take a broad view of the organisation itself in terms of at the C-suite level, aims and objectives, and higher level direction of where the business is going. And it may be that it's cost driving. It may be that there's acquisitions to think about. It may be that there's a particular product initiative that they needs investment and needs growth. But ultimately, it's also looking about the operational departments and how they're using their applications on a day-to-day basis, how they serve their customers, and how efficient that process is.
And that's probably a key point, isn't it? Because you can make all the decisions you want in a boardroom, but actually the truth is what's happening on the floor is that we're using older legacy bits of software that don't quite work. The board might have a vision to move to the cloud and carry on. But ultimately, if the solution is an old legacy, can't be moved to the cloud,
correct.
I guess that's the sort of stuff we're looking at. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's perfectly typical. And it's not uncommon to have a particular vision about here's what we need to do from a business perspective. But the reality of that is slightly different. So it's about weeding out those particular elements and then deciding, well, how do we restructure that, or how do we use technology to solve some of those barriers?
So in summary, we're saying a strategy plan is a business plan that involves investment from everybody across the organisation to come up with a strategy of how we can improve technology within the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, you just mentioned to me a moment ago then that strategy really is about looking at where we are today, looking at where we want to go, and the strategy piece is working out what that journey looks like.
Correct.
So why is it so important to look at where we are today?
So the first fundamental step is that we need to take into account where the organisation is on their IT journey. So that really means uncovering effectively all the technologies that are currently in use. So that could be diving down into the technicals. So it could be looking at networking, servers, applications, databases, any cloud services that are in use, and effectively it's gathering an audit of the state of play. And that's really helpful because we can then determine that we might have a bunch of really useful technologies in there that are already aiding the business and already work quite nicely. But it enables us to identify some areas where it could be a risk or concern or a weakness to that particular strategic direction. So it enables us then to have a base to build on, to say, these parts are good, these parts are bad, this might be a risk to the business, and we can go from there.
So, and I guess one of the main things is that it's not necessarily just about the hardware, right? Because all those things we're talking about, like firewalls and switches and the apps that we're using, and probably even the contracts that are sitting behind some of those bits of software you're buying, or the hardware that you're leasing potentially, or whatever. But I guess it's not just about a list of hardware and warranties and when things expire. So, at what point does it dig into the business?
That audit process is a combination really of the technical and also sitting with operational teams to understand that day-to-day end user experience and the process that they go through to interact with customers or serve internal teams. So it could be spotting weaknesses and issues in productivity or reliability of the systems, or just serving a customer the essentials that they need to function correctly.
Right. So, Mark, we've gone out. Let's say we've done that audit. Then we have an understanding now of our hardware assets. And we know what our server estate maybe looks like. We've explored some of the apps. We've looked at our contracts and some of our business processes. But I guess the next important piece really is to understand where we want to get to. So, so where do we get started to work that out?
Yeah. So really, that next step is differentiating what is effectively at this point an IT audit. So we've done the fundamentals. We've looked at patching and security and where the network might have some issues, and there might be some quick wins from that, which actually make a business impact. So it's really important to think about those things once we've done the audit. But the real value in this then is looking at how the business is going to move forward, what initiatives we've got from a business perspective, and then marrying that into what we're going to do with IT.
So I guess we're saying then there's two fundamental parts here, right? We've got that stuff that everyone should be doing, right? Almost kind of common sense stuff that can be driven maybe by an IT director or an IT manager around, as you mentioned just a moment ago, like patching and some of this stuff that everyone should be doing, making themselves more secure, making themselves more reliable. What happens if something fails? Does something else kick in? So that's a huge part of it. And then the second part of it is actually maybe the direction doesn't come from the IT director, and maybe that comes from the wider board, right? Around what they're looking to do and what the business is trying to do and how we align technology. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is outside of the world of IT. Then we're looking at what are the business initiatives, and it may be that we're looking at cost saving. It may be looking that we're looking to grow a particular area of the business over another, and we need technology to support that. It may be that the business is distributed and we're looking at collaboration. So how can we collaborate across distributed teams better?
Well, that's probably something that everybody watching this may be able to relate to a few of those things. And we see different things all the time. So I wonder if it's worth us, if I were to come to you and say, actually, my business is looking to really move into a world of remote working,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe I've got a requirement to save money. I don't want to pay for my office anymore.
Yeah.
So what sort of things will we be looking at in the strategy review if the business direction was to move to a remote working model?
Yeah, and obviously this is a big trend at the moment in terms of hybrid working or fully remote, and there's lots of organisations that are not only remote in the UK but perhaps remote overseas as well. So a big part of that is looking at how the applications are working at the moment. So whether they are currently server based or cloud based or potentially SaaS based, and it's also looking at what collaboration tools we've got available for us to connect those teams together. And looking at the processes that they go through on a daily basis to work effectively.
Perfect. And I guess the other thing that I think, well, we see quite a lot here, those organisations that are perhaps looking to seek investment, or maybe already have investment of some sort. Maybe they're going through a merger and acquisition process, whatever.
Yeah.
How does that steer a strategy?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind really there, and I think a company that are looking for an investment, it may be about presenting data very quickly and accurately to whoever is investing. So that there may be a piece about looking at all the data that's within the organisation and drawing that out easily. And the other element is that if you're the company acquiring other organisations or looking to grow through acquisition or just rapid expansion, you need that scalability in your IT system. So you need to be able to suck up new users and potentially new sites in a quick fashion, and making sure that doesn't impact the rest of your business. And you've got a nice process to do that.
Which is ideally where the cloud comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and look, another thing probably, certainly in the private sector, we've got a lot of uncertainty at the moment. Everybody's pulling those purse strings a bit tighter. Yeah. It's fair to say that I think a lot of people are saying, I just don't want to spend as much money as I did last year on IT. So how, are there any quick wins there? Anything we can advise that maybe go and have a look for?
Yeah, absolutely. So there may be some organisations that have a set IT budget. So this is the amount you've got to spend, and then it's looking about the efficiency of that budget and what is most useful for the organisation. There may be technologies in the wider landscape which may be cheaper alternatives that are much of a muchness of what they're using at the moment. It may be about standardising technologies. So we don't spend lots of money on lots of different systems. It may be rationalising that and bringing that together. And the other thing about costs as well is that a lot of organisations have moved into a cloud world already. So there's lots of services that could be in Azure or 365, etc. But the reality of those worlds is they're very large and all-consuming. So often we find that rationalising that particular spend, or maybe there's elements of those particular product suites that they're not utilising properly or frankly don't need. So yeah, it's about sort of trimming that as well.
Yeah, awesome. So Mark, we've talked then about kind of what a strategy review is. We talked about the fact that it starts with that audit potentially of what our estate looks like today and what the business is doing today with technology. We looked at where are we going, and we mentioned the idea of looking at those kind of key things that everybody should be doing.
Yeah.
Those quick wins, those things to strengthen our posture, to make sure that we're more resilient, more robust. But we've also kind of pointed out that actually that's not enough. We need to look at those specific industry niche requirements that every business has that's completely different for every business. So, but I guess irrelevant to those things, there's some core fundamental things that we need to go and look at.
Yes.
So give us some ideas of some of the things that we're going to be including in our strategy plan.
Yeah. So from a technical perspective, there are a typical list which you would sort of come across and we would want to take into account as part of the IT plan. So really that's looking at business applications, where they're situated, how the users engage with those applications, what data we need to serve to those particular applications. That's also looking at the underlying factors of the existing IT infrastructure. So that could be things like networking and potentially where databases live within that particular network. We're also looking at security and compliance. So organisations might have particular compliance standards which they need to adhere to, which obviously then affects the direction of travel. And I think it's also important to point out that, again, every business is different. So some organisations might want us to have a particular focus on one of those areas, around security, for instance. But typically we would digest all of those elements.
Okay, so let's take each of those then and dig into that section a little bit more detail. Yeah. Right. So, Mark, in the world of a strategy plan, then one of the main things we're looking at is business applications. Why is that so important?
It's really important to identify the key business processes, as we've already started to talk about, and the organisational objectives. But fundamentally, from an end user perspective, that boils down to the applications they use on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important to understand where those applications are situated. So there might be more legacy applications that are on-premise. They might be running from a server in the cloud. They may be SaaS-based. But these ingredients are important to understand in terms of, again, the overall vision and objective of where we want to be and how users need to interact with those services.
And we mentioned SaaS. There's scenarios where we use that term all the time.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm sure lots of people don't really understand the difference between, when we talk about applications, we say legacy app and SaaS. Like,
yeah.
Is it worth explaining the difference between those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess we would refer to a legacy application as something that is server based. So you may need a server and potentially a database underneath that for that application to function. Whereas a SaaS based application is purely browser based. So you're working from an end user device, and that leads into things like remote working and other objectives that we've talked about before as well.
And I guess the big advantage of that shift is, because you're not looking after the server and all that bit, all the stuff that goes with it, it's up in the cloud.
Yeah.
There's a potentially a cost saving there, because we're not replacing servers, we're not worrying about warranties and things, right?
Yeah.
So and as we expand on that, then I mean, there are a few key applications, I think, that I can see that we've, over the last few years, they've gone from being very traditionally on premise and legacy to being SaaS. There's always some sort of department, like finance is a key example. Most organisations where that transition's happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a couple of things there on the cost point, in terms of it may be more cost beneficial for a SaaS application. It's important to weigh up the benefits to the business for doing that. So it may well be that you don't support it and you don't need to worry about patching it and upgrading it and all the maintenance around it. So you can effectively focus back on those business objectives rather than worrying about that application, which is really important. And there may be situations where businesses still need to rely on key applications that perhaps aren't SaaS based yet. So it may be that in the world of finance, we serve up a slightly different user experience to the rest of the business, which is fairly typical. And if that enables the rest of the business to work in the way that the board have set out as the objectives. So that might be
a key one there is, I mean, in my mind, is Sage, right? So we've always had Sage on premise for a long time. There are obviously cloud-based versions. Some people like it, some people don't. But if you look at probably the pioneer in that space, which was Xero, we saw a lot of people flock to Xero, not necessarily because Xero was the best, but it allowed that organisation to go cloud.
Sure.
Right? Because it wasn't holding them back with one single piece of legacy software. So they kind of accepted that it's not quite as good, but it does everything we need it to do. So let's just get on and do it.
Yeah.
And do we see that a lot? I mean, I'm assuming that happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a decision point then, as you might lose a little bit of functionality, but it is that enabler, and particularly for organisations that are promoting remote working, or want to move away from looking after that application and the costs associated to looking after that application, then that could be the step to take.
And I guess the other thing is that if you are shifting to that sort of cloud-based model, and it's fair to say, I'm sure there's some organisations where that isn't right, but I'll let you talk about that in a second. But if we are shifting to that kind of cloud-based model where things are in a browser, it starts to open other doors in terms of, well, actually, we don't need to have thin clients anymore necessarily, right? We don't need to have, everyone doesn't need to have a laptop. We can give people tablets and more mobile devices, because as long as that device has a web browser, which every device on the planet pretty much has a web browser, then they can still engage to some degree. exactly. But
Yeah.
but I guess going back to my point a moment ago around not every organisation necessarily needs to move to the cloud. You know, there's always going to be some business applications, I assume, where there just isn't a cloud alternative,
Yeah.
and we have to focus in on that legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there may be particular business scenarios where it would still benefit on premise. So, you know, some organizations may be rendering big CAD drawings or large diagrams and working with lots of data and from that perspective. So they would typically benefit from some really fast local storage and a really high-end computer on the local network, right? So you don't have the latency between those cloud services. And if you look at replicating a similar thing in the cloud, again, budget comes into it, right? It's super duper expensive to do that. So there's a bit of a balance. And you may also find that organizations have a production line or something to serve on premise with a set of applications. And from a resiliency point of view, it might be best to have those applications situated in the same space.
Yeah. And I guess probably the biggest, when we talk about business applications, fundamentally, most organizations are using Office, you know, Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. We've seen a big change over the last years without going into the cloud.
Yeah.
I assume that's part of almost every strategic engagement that you're involved with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of organizations out there are using some flavor of 365 services. And it's important for us to identify what services they're subscribing to, and ultimately, are they getting the most out of those services? And what we find is that organizations tend to use a sliver of that particular plan and don't necessarily realize all the underlying applications that are included in that.
Yeah. Well, you're talking my language, because as everybody knows, obviously I bleat on about that very point all the time, where we've got organizations spending an awful lot of money on quite expensive third-party tools, but probably don't need that really expensive third-party tool. You know, if they're looking at the Adobe suite and they're using Premiere Pro to do video editing, but actually their only requirement is to make a small 1-minute video for internal training purposes, do you want to go out and spend thousands of pounds on a really expensive video editing platform when you've got Microsoft Clipchamp baked into your 365 license that you're already paying for? So I guess that's a key thing as well, and that all drives towards consolidating, standardizing, simplifying, which I assume makes everything much easier in the world of the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, every organization is slightly different in terms of some might have internal IT teams that can cope with lots of different systems, and some organizations, you know, may want a simpler world. So consolidating that is one element and one objective that we might look at to make life simple.
Cool. So we talked about business applications. Now, obviously, using business application, and that is fundamental to what we're doing. But of course, the next part of that story is the user using that business application. And what their experience looks like.
Correct.
So and that's generally the message that's fed back, right, to the wider board and to the team, is that this application is not very good. This is really rubbish. This is slow. So how do we scratch into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the end user experience is made up of lots of different components, effectively. So it could be underlying network, it could be the end user device itself, it could be the application, it's the way the application is served. So it's understanding all those different ingredients. And as we talk about the different topics, we're going to see how they're all interlinked effectively. So what one affects the other. But it's really important to understand what the end user experience is like at the moment, and how that complements what the business is trying to do, or if there's any sort of particular issues with that experience at the moment. And it may well be that actually a tweak to the underlying network or technology or something that's serving that end user experience is what's required.
Fine. And it's ultimately going to bring an improvement. And you're right. I mean, if you look at kind of remote working, sometimes you can see an organization that says, well, it's great when we're in the office, but it's really bad when we go home, and the performance isn't particularly good. You know, in our experience, we know that comes down to connectivity, but there's not a lot, I guess, you can do about someone's home connectivity, right? So there's limits to what you can do here, I guess.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I remember an example actually of a user. She was sat in her garage, or in a shed at the bottom of the garden, and working with the finance team, and the finance application was renownedly getting hammered for being not very good. And really, when you scratch into it, you start to realize that it wasn't that the application was so, because it was fine for everyone in the office. But when she was sat in her shed at the bottom of the garden, long way away from their wireless access point in the front room, that delay and that lag was what was causing the application to be particularly bad. And we can't expect our users to understand that. And it doesn't work like that when we use our phones, right? We all just work around and we've got internet, and what's the problem? So, and there's a layer of complexity. So I guess part of strategy is breaking down that complexity,
absolutely,
and understanding how those things are linked.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's breaking down those components into individual items effectively, and looking at how they effectively are at the moment, first and foremost. But there's a limit to what you can control from a connectivity perspective, certainly. But what I would say from an end user experience point of view is that the wider world, connectivity is only getting better. So we've got 5G, we've got fiber to the premises, and you can obviously get fast internet connections at home. So it's understanding the journey, and we often get frustrations from an end user experience that this piece of technology or application doesn't work, but it's scratching the surface and looking at all the different components to make that work.
And that could be a laptop as well, right?
Yeah, it could be an end user device. It could be an end user device is slow, or it could be that there's not enough space on the device. It could be that you're processing lots of data, and maybe your bandwidth can't cope with it. So there's lots of different things to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And I guess what we're getting at then is that we need to be looking at our laptops.
Yeah.
Certain departments might have really, really powerful laptops, and others don't, and therefore their end user experience on slightly weaker laptops is not as good as the marketing team that have got really, really powerful machines and loads of videos and bits and pieces. We're looking at connectivity. That can have an impact on the end user experience. We could well be just looking ultimately at the end user's understanding of an application and the process. Is the process really complex and long?
Correct.
Can we streamline that? Can we bring automation into that piece to make it some of that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's a big conversation, right?
It is, yeah, and it could be really apparent that there are some obvious changes to make to that end user experience. For example, it could be that we've got a set of applications again in a desktop environment, for example, and this slightly links to business applications, like we said before. But it could be that we're serving a set of applications in a way that is perhaps unproductive for that user, and there's a better way to do it. So, and that links into maybe moving to more cloud services and moving those applications out of that desktop environment more onto a local machine, which might speed up the way they're working. It's all these ingredients mixed together which make up that experience.
Okay, cool. So when we look at the infrastructure that we've currently got underpinning all those business apps and the end users experience and stuff, that could be servers and networking and switching and all sorts of things, right? But I'm assuming today most organizations are landing in one of a few camps, right? Whether it's cloud or hybrid or on-premise.
Sure.
What if we start with on-premise? I assume there's still some advantages to having things on-prem sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and on-premise services shouldn't be ruled out. It's not like everything needs to be in the cloud effectively. And this comes back to a few things. It's looking at what the organisation is doing, what industry sector they're in, what their aims and objectives are, what their budget is, and potentially if they've got the ability to look after that on-premise environment, because that's a big factor of keeping it on-premise. So there's a number of different ingredients there, and again, it probably comes back to the layers that we've already been talking about as well in terms of end user experience and business applications. So the way that we are serving those applications to end users might be better suited in a slightly different model. So it might not be on-prem, it might be cloud, depending on what the business wants to do.
And we've got, I've had conversations with people over the years that are very kind of anti-cloud, very anti-moving their data out and moving it to cloud. And obviously that's getting harder and harder to stop now. And Microsoft have taken away our on-premise mail servers and told us we've got to have it in 365. So actually, if you are using that in any capacity, you are using some cloud services, which I guess steps you up from being purely on-prem. And I guess the advantage of on-prem is security. Right? If you're an MOD organisation, you've got to be air-gapped and you can't be connected to the internet. You haven't got a choice. Right? But most organisations are probably either in a hybrid state,
Yeah.
or a cloud. So
Yeah.
it's probably worth explaining what hybrid is.
Yeah, effectively, it's a mixture of. So you might have some services that are on premise. Maybe you've got legacy applications, or maybe you haven't taken a full jump into cloud services. But like you say, I think the world is slightly forcing our hand into cloud services and cloud applications. So typically, again, organizations will have 365 services, probably adjoined to their on-premise world, or if they're not adjoined, they can be adjoined. So there's a bit of a seamless world from that perspective. For some organizations, having a hybrid is actually the right solution. There might be some genuine reasons why you want to keep certain sets of data or applications on premise. There may be a cost consideration to take into account as well. So it's a bit of a balance of what works best, and that's a perfectly good usage model.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Cost is a key thing, because actually the cloud generally means a cost per user per month. And that brings us to a world of how do you want to spend your money? Right?
Yeah.
Some organisations are going to want to prefer a capital spend over operational spend.
Yeah.
So actually being on-prem or being hybrid allows you to buy your hardware, for a set number of years, rather than have to just kind of sign up to an agreement over many years.
That's right.
Forever. So look, I totally get that. And so I guess the step after that on-prem to go to hybrid, the next step after hybrid is really to go fully into the cloud.
Yeah, sure.
And we've seen kind of a lot of startup organizations and younger businesses seems to be where they're landing and they're starting. But really, if you're looking at the strategy piece, there's a difference between moving strategy on for those cloud-based customers and moving strategy on for maybe an on-prem or a hybrid customer. I guess on-prem and hybrid, the conversation probably is about cloud and whether it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there comes a point in time where if a customer is on-premise or hybrid, they at least should be considering what the cloud options are and taking that step. And I think part of a plan is getting the awareness of what you could do as an organisation. So what options are available and out there. But for organisations that are fully cloud, what we tend to find is that, again, maybe they're using a proportion of those particular cloud services and not really optimising it as efficiently as they could be. But when they get into that cloud environment, there's lots of different options. So it's a world of different features and benefits that you could plug into that existing environment. So again, something from a business perspective that might not be utilised at the moment that could be utilised. So it's about exploring those options as well.
So if I was a customer today and I'm moving to the cloud, this conversation about IT infrastructure, I guess, is not the conversation it may have been 5 years ago, because we're probably not spending as much money on servers. But I assume there's still an investment required around the networking infrastructure.
Correct.
So if I was looking at my strategy today, I'm a cloud-first business. How much investment do I still need to put into the wires in the wall and the wireless access points? Is that still important?
Yeah, it's still really critical, and you're only as good as your connection to the cloud services, effectively. And again, from a connection point of view, there's different ways to cut that model effectively. There are different options out there depending on business requirements. So there's still an element of looking at the underlying network. Is that fit for purpose? The way that you're connected into that cloud services, are they efficient? Are they cost effective, etc.? So it's really important to bear in mind.
Cool. So another key thing that we need to be looking at, I assume, is our security posture. Whether that means cyber security, whether that means just our resilience when it comes to backups and DR. Maybe we've got a level of compliance or governance applied to us as an organisation. So give me an idea of how we start scratching some of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, it's important to pay heed to any compliance requirements that an organisation is subject to. And again, different industries will have different compliance requirements. It might be that you have to be Cyber Essentials certified to, tender for business or keep suppliers, etc. It might be, ISO standards. So understanding that world is important as part of your strategy piece. But it's also really important to understand that the security landscape is changing, is readily changing, and moves a fairly fast pace. So it's important again to understand any issues that you might have now, what the market is doing, and what best practice really looks like from a security point of view.
And I guess when we're looking at the market and we're looking at best, or standards that we should be meeting, things like EDR, right, are an entry point. Where we're saying, okay, well, if you've got antivirus, we'll probably need to be looking at an EDR solution now as a minimum. So, but as we move on then to from a cyber perspective, I guess the issue is you can spend a lot of money on cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So where do we draw a line?
Yeah,
because
sure.
surely that's another conversation we've got to have with the business. Right?
Yeah,
how much money do you want to spend? Because you can spend an awful lot of money on cyber.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do you cut it off?
Yeah, this sort of interlinks with, again, some of the other subjects, and that's why IT is lots of different jigsaw pieces that you put together effectively. But cyber, like many things, you can sort of dial up and down from a cost point of view. Sure, if you're sort of MOD, then you probably want to dial it up because your business requirements, are associated to that.
Back to the uniqueness of every individual organisation.
Yeah, correct, absolutely. But if you're a small startup, then you might just want to cover the essentials, right? So make sure that actually you've got a decent footprint, and you're not exposing yourself to particular threats, and you've got a bit of peace of mind that you're following best practices.
Yeah. And I guess something to say about there is that whilst we can spend a lot of money on some really incredible cybersecurity products, we're going back to the idea of using a slither of your cloud service. There's a whole load of security stuff baked into your Microsoft 365 business premium licensing. It's really good. There are obviously Gartner top right solutions out there that can improve on that. But so cyber's key. I guess that's a main underlying theme throughout an entire strategic review. I guess one of the challenges, and if anybody watching is in an IT director's role, I guess one of the challenges is probably how we have that conversation with the C-suite. And in the IT world, we all get it. We all understand it. We see every day some of the impacts that cyber's having. But having that conversation with the C-suite, how do we get that message across?
Yeah, and I think some of this might come from the audit itself, right? So if we've done an audit in the first place, which is our first step, there may be some bits that we can take to the C-suite directly and say, well, actually, this isn't great. Here's some remedial actions. But the thing I would say with conversations with customers over the past couple of years, that directors are becoming ever more aware of the security landscape. Absolutely. Really, it's more in the public domain, and how important security is. That relates to other subjects around resilience, and failover should you need that. And again, that's a bit of a sliding scale, but it's about understanding that if you had a security issue, then the impact on the business, and what is the cost of that, who can't work, and how do we fail over that, and how do we effectively restore ourselves if that's the case.
We've seen sort of numerous times the idea of an issue occurs, a server fails. We've seen a customer that's had a cybersecurity incident, needs to recover data, and they've got a backup. We know that they've got a backup. They get an email every day that says we've got backups. But actually, when it happens, like they don't know what to do necessarily, right? So and that's where the DR plan. We've got enough plans going on as this business plan, strategy plans, and now DR plans. But I assume all of this is important because it's not just having a backup, right?
Absolutely. What's that process? Having a backup and a robust backup is again the first step on that journey, and it comes back to the sector of the business and budget and things like that, because continuity plans are a sliding scale. But even if you've just got a backup, it's worth having the plan of, okay, what do we do with that backup if we need to initiate it?
And probably DR is the key bit. If you're an organisation that cannot manage any downtime, then as you just mentioned, the scale goes up. Right? But that isn't necessarily a decision that the IT director, the IT manager makes. Right? That's a decision that board potentially are taking. How much they're prepared to spend to make sure that they don't have any downtime. And where's that balance coming? And I assume whatever gets proposed off the back of the strategy, you can't really make a decision without that input.
Absolutely. So again, it comes back to business impact and tolerance of that impact, I guess. There are cases out there as well of a security incident then failing over into that continuity plan and keeping the business on its feet. And ultimately, if the business hasn't got revenue coming through the door, you can't invoice your customers, then you're going to have a bit of a problem. So yeah, it's just being mindful of those things as part of that plan.
Right, excellent. And I think what we end up with then is that we take in this information, the business apps, the end users experience, the infrastructure that we're looking at, the business processes that we talked about previously, and we've then got to package that together and work out how do we present that. Right, so we've covered quite a bit there. So we talked about, where we are today. We talked about where we're going, why the strategy is important. It's the glue that holds those or stitches that together and gives us a plan for a journey. The experience of the user. We've looked at the business applications, the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now this is a lot of information,
Yes.
to portray in a document that we want to give to our C-suite or our director or our manager to give an idea of the strategy of the business. So how do we get that down, and how do we start to produce a document like that?
Yeah. Okay. So the way we do it, first of all, is to know who we're feeding back to, of course, effectively. So it may be that we're feeding back to an IT director or an IT manager as part of that conversation. So some of their feedback might be more technical. So we might be doing like technical designs or a bit more technical information about how we're implementing some of these elements. And the other sort of audience would be, directors and C-suite, and therefore they might want more of a summary about, right, give me the key components and the direction of travel.
Yeah, and I guess that might be, rather than giving me the nitty-gritty detail, it's give me an idea of risk.
Yeah.
What could happen if this part of the IT goes wrong? But I guess it doesn't all have to be negative. It can also be, a positive outcome by changing something in strategy. It increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the piece where we're then aligning to those business goals. So yeah, there might be some risks that get called out, but ultimately, if we're talking to the MD or the boards, then it might be we can do these things with technology to underpin the goals that we spoke about at the start of the process.
Sure.
So it's really sort of marrying those pieces together. But there's a number of components that we will typically include as part of this feedback to help digest all that information, and it is a lot. Often these sessions, we go through lots of different bits and pieces, and we have follow-up sessions, etc., because there is a lot to take in. But we would digest it down into a few components effectively. So one tool we use is a RAG rating. Particularly if that report or presentation is going to board level, so we can nicely summarize where we're at with the IT infrastructure. And of course, the technical people want to dig into those particular findings, but an MD might just want a summary of, right, okay, where are we at today? So
the idea being that you have a kind of networking is red.
Sure.
Investment, or
it might be
years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's always green if it got put in last year.
Yeah, that's
particularly performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So at that point, we can highlight any particular risks from the audit, which was again that first step, which again might give us some natural starting points, right? If there are things that are red on that RAG rating, then that might be the immediate place to say, okay, well, external security is red, so actually, let's take a look at that as a starting point. Yeah. So boiling back that RAG rating is really important. But then it's from there looking at those business objectives again and the journey effectively. So we're putting that roadmap together to say, actually, from the audit, here's where we are, here's where we need to get to, and how we get there. So that could be, a number of phases. It could be, certain technologies that are introduced as part of those phases. And typically, it's not necessarily a big bang approach, right? So it could take, 18 months, could take 2 years to get to the end goal. It could be slightly shorter. So it's just determining what that is.
And that's a really good point. I mean, something we haven't mentioned is the timescale.
Yeah.
No one's necessarily, it might be the strategy is to do something next week, but it's very likely, right? It's more about what you're doing next year or in 2 years' time and the journey you need to go on to do that. So we talked there about the RAG chart and a great visual way of bubbling up risk into the C-suite.
Yeah.
I imagine the thing they really want is money.
Yeah.
And the commercials.
That's it. Yeah.
How do you get that message?
Yeah. So we accompany that project plan, that roadmap, with effectively a budget. So the executives are well informed about where that spend is going. And again, this comes back to industry requirements and the business requirements in general, we may have saved some money somewhere to reinvest somewhere else. But it's about giving that visibility of where that investment is going over that plan.
And look, one of the things I really like about the reports that you create is that is the nice easy grid system where we're looking at either quarterly or monthly an investment over that quarter. You need to replace these devices in 18 months time because they're going to be out of warranty, they're going to be end of life. But allowing the C-suite to get visibility so that when they're doing their forecasting within their own accounts, they can say, well, actually, we've got to ramp up in IT spend that year and not on that quarter, but actually once we've done that, it's going to save us a certain amount of money.
Absolutely.
So it's not always doom and gloom and we need to spend loads of money, right? So I assume sometimes it's like, do this, invest here, and you could save every month.
Absolutely. And again, one of those key objectives might be that we've got, as an example, loads of cloud services that we're spending too much money on, right? So it might be that actually we make some changes and within this particular period of the year, then you can see your IT budget coming down and we might reinvest it in security, just as an example. So but it's about portraying that for again, directors or management. And that visibility then helps with planning for next year. So it's not a surprise that maybe we need to spend this particular amount for IT in that particular month. But spending that amount might account to us serving our customers better. So there's an outcome associated with
that. And I guess that's a key point really is ultimately every organisation hopefully is looking to be able to deliver a better outcome and a better service to their customers. And that isn't just about improving the infrastructure and the networking, buying people new devices. It's about changing the process. It's something we've touched on quite a lot as we've spoken. Is that visibility of internal processes and where we can run technology. So again, is that something that you include in the RAG chart as such? Do you call some of this stuff out in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So business applications and the underlying processes that are associated to those applications in particular are called out as part of the RAG chart. And there may be obvious bits that we call out as part of the presentation, and it's probably worth noting that we tend to present back because it gives a collaborative opportunity for people to pitch in and tweak things or tweak timelines, etc. So it makes it more collaborative than here's your IT plan. But those process improvements could be captured by the RAG chart or could be captured by highlighting time saved or efficiency improvements, etc.
And I guess the last thing is that what we encourage here, a lot of conversation about the art of the possible and where we could go, and we push the boundaries a little bit.
That's right.
And we do that deliberately, really, because we want people's ideas and thoughts. So just because it's in a strategy plan, let's maybe the organisation really benefit from automation. Maybe there's a bunch of processes that are really kind of tiresome, and it's taking this person a long time to do, or this role is simply to copy a document from here to here. That stuff can be streamlined, and that person can be used better. So, but I guess the point I'm making is that the strategy review doesn't necessarily need to be this is what you must do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very much a conversation. You pointed to collaboration.
Sure.
It's a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and part of the plan could be, again, you're here at the moment, but this is almost the art of the possible of what's out there, and it might not be like the immediate actions that are in the plan. It might be like further down the road, you might want to consider these particular technologies, and again, they could enhance what we're doing.
Well, I found that really, really useful. Thank you very much indeed. I know you're incredibly busy man, so I'm going to let you get back to what you're doing. But thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and hopefully everyone else found that useful. So thanks.
Okay, so there we had Mr. Crutchley talking all about strategy. I hope you found that useful and interesting. I appreciate there's lots of ground that we covered, but a fountain of knowledge, as I'm sure you'll agree. I know many of you will know Mark, certainly for existing customers. I'm sure you've had a conversation, or he's been down to see you at some point, and obviously something that we do for all of our support customers is offer that strategy piece. So, if you want to have a conversation about it, then please do get in touch with your account manager and whatnot. But really, just wanted to focus on them. We've gone over lots and lots of time, so we'll do this really quickly. But just remember that process. Really, look at what you've got. Look at where you want to go. Strategy is the glue that makes that tie together from where you are to where you want to end up. But it's not just about the IT manager and the IT director deciding where you're going to end up. It's a whole business-wide decision. You need to take input from all parts of the business to get a complete picture. And make sure you're looking at business applications, end user experience, IT, security, and whatever else that's niche to your industry and to your business, all right? So I hope you find that useful with those 7 points. I don't know if there's any questions that people want to throw at me very, very quickly. If there are, please feel free to put it in the chat. It's been very quiet, which is always a good sign. But just to remind you that we do have these webinars and these sessions that come up all the time. We've got particularly popular one, which is our tips and tricks, which I think is the next one, isn't it? In fact, it's on the screen right now. So around OneDrive, SharePoint, Forms, and Sway. So we can talk about those bits and pieces next time we get involved. But if you've got any questions, feel free to fire it away. If not, thank you very much for joining me again. Hopefully you'll join us for the next one. That's one of our fast-paced ones where I'll be doing live demos and bits and pieces. And if you're intrigued to know more about strategy, or you're thinking about doing it yourself, then you want some advice or guidance, then obviously we encourage you to reach out, get in touch, and we can definitely help. All right. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Take care. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks, then.